I was standing in my kitchen in Oakville, stirring cream into my coffee, when the CBC morning segment cut to a live feed from a hotel ballroom in Geneva. And there was my younger sister Tamsin, 29 years old, in a gown that cost more than my mortgage, marrying into the Viral banking family. I hadn't been invited. 41 hours earlier, she'd stood in my hotel room in Switzerland and told me I was a liability to her new life. I watched the broadcast with my coffee going cold in my hand, feeling nothing but the low hum of my own pulse, when someone knocked on my door so hard the wreath on it swung. I'm Odessa. I'm 36, and I'm a forensic risk analyst for one of the big 5 banks here in Toronto, the kind of job where nobody at a dinner party knows what I actually do until something goes wrong and they need someone quiet and precise to find out why. When I opened my front door that morning, 2 men in dark wool coats were standing on my porch, and one of them said, in a French accented voice, that Monsieur Verreau, the family patriarch, required my presence in Geneva immediately, that a car was already waiting to take me to Pearson. Before I explain how my sister's fairy tale wedding turned into a continental banking scandal, I want to tell you where this started, because none of it makes sense unless you understand what happened 2 days before that knock. I'd flown to Geneva on a Tuesday, jet-lagged and hopeful in the stupid, stubborn way you are when you still think being a good sister will get you somewhere. Tamsin was marrying Etienne Verreau, the second son of a family that had run private banking in Switzerland for 4 generations. I'd booked myself into a modest room at the Beau Rivage, on the family's floor, but at the far end, tucked between the ice machine and a stairwell, which told me everything about where I ranked before anyone said a word. I was hanging my navy suit for the rehearsal dinner when the door burst open without a knock. Tamsin stood there in a robe of raw silk, her hair already set, diamonds at her ears that our parents definitely hadn't bought her. She threw an envelope at my chest. It hit my collarbone and fell to the carpet. "Pick it up," she said. Inside was a one-way economy ticket back to Toronto, departing in 4 hours. "What is this?" I asked her, keeping my voice level, the way I do in a room full of executives who've just found out I've flagged their numbers. "It's your exit," she said. "You're 36, Odessa. Unmarried, no kids, you spend your whole life buried in spreadsheets at a bank that isn't even yours. The Virals care about pedigree. I can't have my sister standing in the family photos looking like a claims adjuster from Mississauga. You don't fit here. I need you gone before the rehearsal dinner." I'd spent a decade quietly wiring money to our parents when their restaurant in Hamilton went under, covering Tamsin's tuition, when she dropped out of 2 different programs, working the kind of hours that meant I hadn't taken a real vacation since I was 28, and I'd never once mentioned any of it, because our mother always said, "Don't make your sister feel small." "I'm your sister," I said. "I flew across an ocean for you." "I didn't ask you to," Tamsin snapped. "I'm marrying into one of the oldest banking families in Europe. I need this to look right." Then her eyes dropped to my neck, to the thin gold chain with our grandmother's opal pendant, the one piece of jewelry Nana Solveig had left specifically to me, in writing, because she knew Tamsin would have pawned it inside a year. Tamsin grabbed it. The chain snapped against the back of my neck, hard enough that I gasped. "A future Viral should be wearing this, not a spinster who audits loan files," she said, dropping it into her robe pocket. "Consider it my wedding gift from you. Have a good flight home." She left. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at the red welt on my neck, and something in me went very quiet and very cold, the way it does right before I find the one number in a ledger that doesn't add up. I found our parents in the lobby an hour later, my mother Denise in emerald green holding court near the piano bar. My father Wallace beside her with a scotch, both of them performing wealth they'd never actually had. When I told them what happened, the ticket, the theft, the necklace, my mother sighed like I'd interrupted her at brunch. "Odessa, must you make everything a production?" she said. "Your sister is under enormous pressure. It's one necklace." "She assaulted me," I said. She's uninviting me from her own wedding. My father set down his scotch. Your sister is marrying into serious money. We can't have you hovering around looking resentful. You've always been jealous of her. I paid off the restaurant's line of credit, Dad. I paid Tamsin's tuition twice. That's exactly the problem, my mother said. You're so wrapped up in money you've forgotten how to be supportive. Go pack. Use the ticket she gave you. When I said I wasn't leaving without my grandmother's necklace, my father flagged hotel security and told them, without blinking, that I wasn't on the guest list and was harassing the family. 15 minutes later, I was walking through that marble lobby with 2 guards flanking me and a suitcase rattling behind me, and my mother didn't even turn around. I stood outside on the cobblestones in the Geneva evening, with no hotel, no family, and a coat that wasn't warm enough, and I thought, they forgot what I do for a living. I pulled out my phone to book a new room, and every card I tried came back declined. Not one, all 4. My checking account, which usually sat comfortably in the 5 figures, showed a balance of negative $1,100. My hands actually shook dialing my sister-in-law. Priya answered on the second ring. She's married to my older brother Reese, 38, a high school teacher back in Burlington, who has never once stood up to our parents in his life. Priya is a securities litigator at a firm on Bay Street, the kind of woman who reads bond covenants for fun, and she is the only person in this family who ever looked at my parents and saw exactly what they were. Odessa, listen to me, she said, and her voice had none of its usual warmth. Are you somewhere safe? I'm outside a hotel. Security just threw me out. My cards are all declined. I know, she said. I'm sitting in my home office right now with a stack of mail that got forwarded from your parents' place in Hamilton because your name is still listed as secondary contact on some old joint account. Odessa, your credit score dropped almost 300 points in the last 2 days. That's not possible. I have 0 debt. I've never missed a payment in my life. You didn't open these accounts, Priya said. Someone else did. She started reading me line items off letters, addressed to me. A home equity line, a business line of credit, a numbered company registered in Ontario that I had never heard of. And my stomach dropped through the floor of that cobblestone street. Whoever did this knew my SIN number, my mother's maiden name, the name of our childhood dog. They knew every security question because they'd raised me. You're telling me our parents stole my identity, I said. And even saying it out loud felt insane. It's worse than that, Priya said. I pulled the property registry for the Hamilton duplex your grandfather left the 3 of you jointly. Odessa, there's a new second mortgage registered against it. $1.8 million. Your signature is on it. I actually laughed, a short, ugly sound, because it was so far beyond anything I'd braced for. I haven't signed anything. I was in a board meeting in Toronto the day that would have been notarized. There are 11 witnesses. I know, Priya said. Which is exactly why we're going to bury them with it. But right now I need you off that street. I'm sending an e-transfer to a prepaid account under a name that isn't tied to your compromised profile. Get somewhere with Wi-Fi and get warm. I found a 24-hour cafe 3 blocks off the lakefront. The kind of place with sticky tables and a barista who didn't care who I was. And I got on a video call with Priya. She screen-shared the mortgage document. There was my name on the signature line, a near-perfect forgery, notarized 11 days earlier by a notary public my parents happened to golf with. A $1.8 million HELOC requires income verification, I said, my analyst brain kicking in over the panic. Who verified my income? They used your T4s, Priya said. Your actual T4s, Odessa. From your actual employer. Your credit was immaculate. Your income was documented and enormous by Hamilton standards, and the lender rushed it through because on paper you looked bulletproof. Where did the money go? Priya pulled up a wire trail. It cleared into a holding account 9 days ago. Then it moved. Your father wired the entire amount to an account in Geneva. 9 days ago, was exactly when Tamsin started posting photos of a shopping trip through the Rue du Rhône. It was when my parents suddenly upgraded from Air Canada economy to a chartered jet. They needed it for the wedding, I said quietly. Not exactly, Priya said, and pulled up an article from a Swiss society magazine. Odessa, the Viral family requires a bridal contribution. It's an old money custom. The bride's family establishes an independent trust to prove she's not marrying in for the money. It's practically a Swiss banking prerequisite for their circle. Your parents needed to prove Tamsin came from real, established wealth. They don't have $1,800, let alone 1,800,000, I said. So they stole my credit file to fake a dowry. They hijacked your entire financial life, Priya said. Your salary, your credit history, your years of not spending money on anything fun. They packaged all of it and used it to buy Tamsin a seat at that family's table. I sat there with my coffee going cold, exactly like it would 2 days later, in my own kitchen watching the broadcast, and I understood something with total clarity. My parents had run the numbers on me. They'd looked at their responsible daughter and calculated exactly how much fraud my credit file could absorb before it collapsed, and they'd decided I was worth sacrificing. They knew what this would do to me, I said. Wage garnishment, a fraud investigation, my licensing with the bank. I could lose my job over an unauthorized debt with my name on it, even if it's forged. They knew, and they did it anyway. Priya's jaw was tight on screen. Then let's give them a reason to regret it. What do you need from me? I need everything, I said. IP logs on that notarization, wire routing numbers. And Priya, keep Riss out of it. If he finds out, he'll call Mom crying and warn them before we're ready. My husband has been burying his head about your parents for 15 years, Priya said flatly. I'm done protecting him from that. You have my word. I closed the call and sat in that cafe as the espresso machine hissed behind me, and for the first time since I'd landed in Switzerland, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like I did on the mornings I found the fraud everyone else had missed. I found a budget inn near the freight yards outside the city, the kind of place that didn't ask questions and took a prepaid card without blinking, 3 floors up from a laundromat, with a kettle instead of a coffee maker. I hung my navy suit in a closet with a door that didn't fully close, sat down at a particle board desk, and opened my laptop. I want to be clear about something. I am not dramatic by nature. I once found a $400,000 embezzlement inside a commercial mortgage file and flagged it in a memo so calm, my manager thought I was reporting a typo. But sitting in that room, I felt something shift into place, cold and exact, the way it does right before I write up a file that ends someone's career. I connected through my firm's VPN, the same one I use to run forensic traces on suspicious commercial loans, and pulled the compressed data package Priya had sent me. The 1.8 million had moved from the Hamilton lender to a clearing account in Delaware, standard for cross-border transfers, and then to a numbered holding company, registered in the Caymans, called Larkhaven Capital Partners. My father had bought it off an offshore broker for less than the cost of his wedding tuxedo. From Larkhaven, the money crossed into a private Swiss account, positioned as a maturing family trust, ready to be presented to the Virals as proof of old money. I ran Larkhaven's registration numbers against international enforcement databases, the same tool I use at work to screen commercial borrowers against watch lists. And the screen returned a hit that actually made me sit back in the cheap wooden chair. Larkhaven wasn't a generic tax shelter. It was flagged in an active joint investigation between the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit and Europol, tied to a laundering network moving proceeds out of the fentanyl trade through Eastern Europe and into Swiss private banking. My father, shopping for the cheapest offshore vehicle he could find to fake a dowry, had run stolen mortgage money through an active narcotics laundering conduit and then wired it straight into the private treasury account of one of Geneva's oldest banking families. I sat with that for a full minute before I picked up my phone. Then the texts started. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since a funeral sent me a link to a gossip blog with a headline asking which newly married Swiss bride had to have her unstable older sister forcibly removed from the hotel before the ceremony. The article, clearly planted, clearly paid for, claimed I'd shown up intoxicated, that I had a history of instability, that my heartbroken parents had been forced to have security walk me out to protect the family from a scene. It called me, without naming me, the disgraced sister reportedly seeking psychiatric care back in Canada. It was a preemptive strike. If I ever tried to say a word about the stolen necklace, the forged mortgage, any of it, I'd already been pre-labeled unstable. My aunt texted asking if I was okay. A former coworker sent her condolences for my recovery. I sat in that dim little room and felt the last thread of guilt I had toward my family quietly burn off like fog. Then my phone rang with an encrypted call from my compliance director, Mr. Aoyagi. My employer runs correspondent banking relationships across 3 continents. Our public profile is our entire business. He told me, not unkindly, that risk management had flagged the tabloid coverage, that my remote access was being suspended pending an internal review, effective within the hour, and that he was sorry, truly, because my file had been spotless for 9 years. I understand, I told him, and I did. Corporate risk doesn't care about truth, it cares about exposure. What my parents didn't know was that 8 months earlier, during a routine resiliency audit, I had built a secondary monitoring credential into our correspondent banking dashboard, a legitimate business continuity measure, buried under my own authorization, that let me maintain visibility into cross-border ledgers if my primary access ever failed. My employer thought they'd locked the front door. I was already inside the walls. I spent the rest of that night building the file. I pulled the notarization metadata and traced the originating IP straight back to the broadband account, registered at my parents' house in Hamilton. I cross-referenced the signing timestamp against my own calendar. And building access logs from the bank tower on Bay Street. I'd been badged into a boardroom on the 14th floor at that exact hour, presenting a quarterly risk report to 9 people. I mapped the wire trail from the Hamilton lender, through Delaware, through Larkhaven, into the Verreau family's escrow. I pulled the RCMP and Europol flags on Larkhaven and laid them beside the transaction hashes, timestamp for timestamp, decimal for decimal. Priya, meanwhile, walked into the Hamilton branch of the lending institution in a charcoal suit, dropped a stack of documents on the manager's desk, and requested the security footage from the room under threat of naming the branch as a co-defendant in a federal fraud complaint. The footage showed my parents at the desk, laughing, my father handing over a tablet with my forged signature, my mother producing a falsified power of attorney the loan officer never verified. Priya walked out with the raw file on an encrypted drive and drove straight home to keep building our case. By sunrise, I had a 100-plus page dossier, the forged signature, the alibi proof, the wire trail, the Larkhaven flags, the RCMP and Europol case, reference, formed exactly like Lasmadas I write for a living, cold, sourced, and undeniable. I didn't send it to Verreau Public Relations. I sent it directly to the family's chief compliance officer, to the Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority. Contact my firm has on file for exactly this kind of cross-border flag, and to Monsieur Verreau's private secretary. On the Canadian side, I routed a full copy through my firm's mandatory financial crimes reporting channel straight to FinTrack and the RCMP flagged priority, citing cross-border money laundering and identity fraud. Then I got dressed, put on the navy suit I'd hung 2 nights earlier, slipped the encrypted drive into my blazer pocket, and waited. It took 22 minutes for the read receipts to start pinging. 41 minutes later, 2 men in dark coats knocked on the door of my budget inn and told me, with actual deference in their voices, that Monsieur Verreau requested my presence at the residence immediately. I rode into the city in the back of a black car that smelled like cedar and old leather, watching, Geneva's cobblestone streets blur past crowds, still lining up with flowers for a wedding that was already, quietly, dead. They took me in through a side entrance, past security with earpieces, down a hallway lined with oil paintings older than Canada, to a set of doors behind which the reception was in full swing. String quartet, 500 guests, cameras from 3 continents. At the center of the floor, Tamsin was dancing with Etienne, our grandmother's opal pendant glittering at her throat. Near the edge of the room, my parents stood glowing with champagne and borrowed prestige. My mother's emerald dress catching the chandelier light, my father holding court with a group of virile cousins, like he'd been born into it. The guards pushed the doors open hard enough that they cracked against the walls. The quartet stumbled into silence. 500 heads turned. Tamsin froze mid-turn, and when her eyes found mine across the room, all the color left her face. I walked in wearing that navy suit like armor, flanked by 2 members of the family's private security, and every step of my heels on that marble floor sounded like a verdict. Monsieur Verreau himself crossed the floor before I'd gone 10 feet. He was 71 years old, built the family's reputation on 3 generations of discretion, and he did not look angry so much as devastated. He took my hand in both of his. "Miss Odessa," he said, his English precise and formal, "you have done this family and this country's banking system an enormous service. I am deeply in your debt." Behind him, my father's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble. My mother grabbed his arm, her face draining white. Tamsin stood frozen, one hand rising instinctively to the necklace at her throat, as if she could feel it turning to lead. I opened my blazer and drew out the dossier, bound and sealed, and handed it directly to Etienne, who took it the way you'd take something already on fire. "Your bride's family told you they were establishing an independent trust to prove old money," I said, loud enough to carry, because 500 people and at least 2 news cameras deserved to hear it clearly. "That money isn't old, and it isn't theirs. My parents forged my signature on a $1.8 million mortgage against a property I co-own, using my stolen identity and my real income history, because I was the only person in this family with a credit file clean enough to fool a bank." "Odessa, please," my father started, but I didn't look at him. "They routed that stolen money through a Cayman shell company called Larkhaven Capital Partners, to disguise it as a maturing trust before wiring it into your family's escrow," I went on, my eyes on Etienne. "Larkhaven is currently under active joint investigation by the RCMP and Europol. It's a known conduit for laundering narcotics proceeds. Your father-in-law didn't just steal from his own daughter to buy his way into your family. He funneled active criminal money into your bank's private treasury." The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind you could feel pressing on your eardrums. Tamsin whispered, "No," over and over, backing away from Etienne like distance could undo it. My mother tried, in a shaking voice, to say I'd always been jealous, that I was unwell, the same script from the tabloid piece. But nobody in that room was listening anymore, because Monsieur Verreau had raised one hand, and in a room built on old Swiss discretion, that gesture meant everything stopped. This union was built on fraud committed against a sovereign banking relationship this family has protected for 4 generations, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "It is annulled, effective immediately." Security moved in on my parents before Monsieur Verreau had even finished speaking. Tamsin was still clutching the opal pendant when the head of household staff quietly stepped forward and asked her to return it. She looked at me across the marble floor, mascara running, and for 1 second I almost felt something. Almost. "That belongs to me," I said. "Our grandmother left it to me, because she knew exactly what you'd do with it." The staff member unclasped it from her neck and placed it in my palm. I closed my fingers around it and felt the metal warm from her skin, and it didn't feel like a wedding gift anymore. It felt like evidence, finally returned to its rightful owner. They were escorted out of that ballroom, and off Swiss soil within 6 hours, banned from re-entry, their remaining funds frozen pending the Fintrack investigation. When their flight touched down at Pearson 2 days later, RCMP financial crimes officers were waiting at the gate with warrants for identity fraud, forgery, and money laundering. My father tried to explain it was a family property dispute right up until the cuffs went on. My mother screamed that I was her daughter, that blood meant something, while they walked her out past a row of cameras that had followed the story all the way home. Tamsin came back to Canada with nothing, no marriage, no trust, no necklace, and a name that was radioactive in exactly the circles she'd spent her whole life chasing. Last I heard she was working retail at a mall in Burlington, folding blouses for women who used to be her friends. Priya filed for divorce from my brother Riss 3 weeks later, not because of anything he'd done to her directly, but because he spent those 3 weeks begging her to help our parents make bail instead of asking how I was doing. I can't build a life with a man who protects people who tried to destroy his sister, she told me over wine in my kitchen, and 6 months after that, we opened a forensic consulting firm together. An irony neither of us has ever gotten tired of. A firm that specializes in exactly the kind of fraud our own family tried to commit. My bank reinstated me within the week, offered me a formal promotion into their financial crimes division, and I turned it down because by then Priya and I already had 3 clients on retainer, including, unofficially, a very discreet ongoing arrangement with a Swiss family that still calls me by my first name. I keep our grandmother's necklace in a drawer in my condo in Oakville now, not worn, just kept, the clasp still slightly bent from where it was torn off my neck. Some mornings I take it out and hold it for a second before I go to work, not because I need reminding of what happened, but because it's proof that the people who think stealing your name will make them powerful never stop to ask what you actually do for a living.